Humans and robots are still at war. Mega Man X may have defeated Sigma, but life hasn't changed much in the 6 months since then. The Maverick Hunters discover an underground Reploid factory and look to end the war once and for all. However, the real war is just beginning. Following the launch of Mega Man X and its fresh take on a stale series, Capcom was back again with a stale take on a fresh series. Fine, perhaps that's too harsh. There may not be many changes in Mega Man X2, but all it needed to do was improve on the first game. This ends up being another game with 8 initial stages before going into the villain's lair, as expected. However, despite the plot's lackluster introduction of new Mavericks, Capcom instead chose to scatter plot developments as the player progresses. This builds on the design efforts from the previous game, even allowing for different outcomes based on the player's performance. Gameplay begins with Mega Man X entering the Reploid factory on a ride chaser. When X gets to his feet and the player gains control, you'll discover that he can once again charge his Buster Cannon and climb walls. Additionally, his dash ability is permanently available, unlike in his first game where it was collected as an upgrade. This intro stage also reminded me of how soulless the enemies appear in the X series. They're just threatening metal constructions, not resembling anything in particular, whereas the classic series enemies were more whimsical. Even the boss, the gigantic Mechanaloid, doesn't seem to have much purpose beyond harming X. It's a big contrast between this timeline and the classic series timeline, in which the robots seemingly had other roles. After beating the intro stage, 8 more Mavericks head out into the world for you to track down and defeat. 'Tis the Mega Man way, whether it's X or not. However, before you can begin, the game introduces an additional 3 Mavericks known as the X-Hunters, tracking every move he makes. Circus resembles an old magician, perhaps leading the trio of hunters. Agile is the tallest and speaks very fast, hinting at his special ability, while the big brute Violin speaks slowly. Such creative names. For now, they won't impact the gameplay, and you can begin by selecting any of the other 8 main Mavericks. The new selection contains robotic animals just like before, each with a special ability. Out of all the names, Wire Sponge takes the cake for the strangest animal and ability, and he's also the default stage on the selection screen. That's where I started, and his stage is the weather control station. It doesn't make sense for a sponge to lurk around here, but it's a good choice for a first stage, although not a great example of level design. It's the blandness that makes it easy for beginners, as well as the 2 upgrades being accessible with minimal abilities. The heart tank is hidden behind the left wall at the start, and there's no indication. This level doesn't make a good impression. Even the changes in weather were disappointing, the heat only adding a visual effect as far as I could tell, and the rain bringing a constant wind. It gets better from here though. To no one's surprise, the Mavericks wait for battle at the end of their stages. Whether it's the classic or X series, this structure has always been the same, and that's fine. Capcom proved that the formula worked, and they just needed to make good content to accompany it. So, after a disappointing stage, I was pleased to see a good boss design for Wire Sponge. He looks more like a jungle plant than an underwater animal pretending to be a plant, and I'm still confused by that design. But hey, the fight is well executed, including environmental hazards and periods of invulnerability. Additionally, beginners shouldn't have much trouble defeating him even while your health bar is limited at first. I always respect when designers can make their easier bosses complex too. You earn a weapon from defeating each boss, again repeating the same old formula. Now, instead of telling you everything that hasn't changed, let's focus on the new elements of Mega Man X2. The differences are subtle, but Capcom made some positive developments. Firstly, the item upgrades are balanced between each level so that there are 2 collectibles in each Maverick stage. All 8 contain a heart tank, with 4 hiding a sub-tank and the other 4 an armor upgrade. Heart tanks function the same, increasing X's maximum health by 2, which doubles the base health from 16 to 32 when all are collected. Sub-tanks store any energy collected while at full health for you to deploy later. Whoops, I'm slipping back into explaining elements that haven't changed. Okay, the body upgrades. These are different and overall for the better. I'm thankful for the dash being a permanent ability, and I'm even more thankful for the air dash upgrade. Who knew an upgrade to X's feet could be so powerful? Now he can start a dash in the air, and its maneuverability is highly useful. The arm parts have been improved too. This is the most similar upgrade, but it's far superior to the arm parts of Mega Man X1. Not only will the Charge Buster reach a new level, it will now store another charge shot for you to use afterwards, dealing high damage. In addition, this upgrade allows you to charge all Maverick weapons, and I felt Capcom gave this aspect much more attention than before. Each charged weapon has a completely reimagined function, some of which have movement perks in addition to damaging enemies. But if you really want to talk about damage, let's talk about the Giga Crush. This body upgrade gives you a move move that damages every enemy on screen, and you build the gauge for this weapon by taking damage yourself. The catch is it requires a full gauge before it can be used, and that of course empties all the energy again. I do wish this could have simultaneously been a defensive upgrade, and I also wish the final upgrade was more exciting. The head parts give X the item tracer ability, which finds secrets in the walls and floors. As interesting as it sounds, it's so rarely useful, and I wish the secrets would be visually obvious without the use of the item tracer. I'd rather have the headbutt from the helmet upgrade in X1. There's also a totally new set of challenges, and it's partly random. Once you've cleared 2 Maverick stages, you'll see another secret meeting between the X-Hunters. This time their plot is revealed as they each hold the remains of X's old friend Zero. His sacrifice in the first game was noble, but when X left him behind, the villains snatched him up and are now attempting to rebuild and reprogram him. However, this is a game, so they want X to have a chance at stopping them. With 2 of 8 Maverick stages down, the X-Hunters split up and enter 3 of the remaining stages. The catch is, the stages they choose are random. Every Maverick stage has a hidden arena for you to fight an X-Hunter, and I found these fights to be harder than each of the main animal Mavericks. If you can defeat all 3 X-Hunters, Zero will be safe in your hands. However, that's easier said than done. Not just because of the fights, but because the punishment for missing an X-Hunter is the maximum it could reasonably be. This was quite the rude awakening. I cleared Flamestag stage without finding the X-Hunter, and then I discovered that I had missed my only chance. If you beat the stage without recovering Zero's parts, you will never have the chance again. It's a consequence that changes the gameplay at the end of the game, as well as having a heavy impact on the story and X's emotions. I feel like it would be wrong if I didn't give a brief overview of each stage, so let's finally see what these Mavericks are about. Overall, I thought the stages were fairly open despite the straightforward nature of these games. Even though Wire Sponge's stage was mediocre, it shows the openness of the design. I then played Wheel Gator's stage, apparently in a dinosaur tank, with several noticeable visual details. The screen shakes frequently, perhaps a little much for my liking, but it sets the scene well alongside the sun setting as you progress through the level. Bubble Crab's deep sea base features some fun underwater exploration, and be careful not to play chicken with the lava of Flamestag's volcanic zone. Morph Moth takes control of the robot junkyard, which is a cool but flawed stage. The upgrade hidden in the floor is unindicated, and the mini-boss drags out the stage with 1 appearance, let alone 2. Everything else around these elements is just fine. The central computer stage has a lot of dangerous moving parts and a creepy computer mini-boss leading up to Magna Centipede. Crystal Snail holds the most purple stage I've seen in a Mega Man game and involves slippery slopes with giant crushing crystals. Last up for me was Overdrive Ostrich in the desert base, and a large portion of the stage is spent on a ride chaser, now in your control unlike the game's introduction. As for the Mavericks themselves, I felt that Capcom toned down their difficulty from the first game. These bosses sometimes change their behaviors partway through the battle, seen best with Morph Moth when he breaks out of his cocoon. For me, this was a better experience than in Mega Man X1. The difficulty was just right. It felt challenging but achievable, even with the low health cap at the beginning. Some bosses were challenging in a tedious way, like Crystal Snail and Wheel Gator, but the others seemed to be reasonably paced. As a whole, the Maverick stages and bosses felt slightly more laid back, giving me the time to enjoy the designs more. You know what's not laid back though? The stupid endgame bosses. Holy moly, this is reverting to the kind of difficulty that I don't enjoy. The game becomes linear when you clear out all initial Maverick stages, and now you'll have to endure 4 X-Hunter stages. The stages themselves feel like a natural step up in difficulty, and then the first X-Hunter you'll face is Violin. Add this fight to the Hall of Nope. He succeeds in his job of defeating X most of the time, and even with all possible upgrades, this fight honestly feels like gambling. 3 tiny blocks appear around the room for you to block his crazy attacks with, and their usefulness feels inconsistent. Opportunities to deal damage to him in return feel rare. The rematches with Agile and Surgus are nothing like this, and they can be pushovers if you use certain weapons against them. I enjoyed the soundtrack to go with these final areas. I think the soundtrack for this game is fairly weak, but improves later on. I admire that these endgame stages continue to show new ideas, like the underwater moving platforms in the second stage and the directional platform in the third stage. The third stage is also home to one final secret, and it's a Capcom crossover again. X1 had Street Fighter's Hadoken, and X2 contains the Shoryuken. This time it has its own dedicated path with some tough platforming, requiring you to utilize all your mobility upgrades, including the charged speed burner weapon. This secret capsule is hidden behind a wall, which I'm still not a fan of, but at least I made my way there. Oh, no capsule for me, I guess. It turns out you also need to be at full health to obtain the Shoryuken, so I was not worthy. The fourth and final X-Hunter stage is simply refighting the first 8 Mavericks in classic Mega Man fashion. It felt more pointless than ever, if I'm being honest. Just one more stage now, returning to the central computer, and the first half plays out exactly like Magna Centipede's stage. That seems lazy. Everything changes at the computer itself, however. If you didn't rescue Zero, you'll be forced to fight him, and he's incredibly tough. I wouldn't have minded if this was the final boss, but there's so much more. Naturally, the villains succeeded in bringing back their leader Sigma in some way or another, and you'll have to fight Neo Sigma immediately afterwards. And Neo Sigma isn't the end either. The final boss is Sigma Virus, as in a computer virus. The color used is a great indicator, and this boss actually offers health refills to make this bearable. The other 2 fights before this, not so much. What annoys me the most is that there's no checkpoint for this revisit to the central computer, so a death against Sigma will have you ripping your hair out. The entire final level is restarted, bosses included. If you didn't rescue Zero, you have no choice but to get through all 3 fights in one life. Needless to say, it was a bitter ending gameplay-wise, continuing from the violent fight earlier. The good news for X is that even with their battle, he was able to bring Zero back to his side, the friends reunited. With Sigma defeated again, it seems there will be peace, but X and Zero know it's only temporary. One does not simply get rid of Sigma. My feelings on this game are generally positive. It took a lot of steps forward from the first game and ultimately tripped over itself. It's like a warm hug and a slap in the face. I think, while I was able to enjoy the concept of Mega Man X more with X2, the game merely didn't impress me as much. Now that I reflect on the game, I want everything to be just a little bit better. Therefore, my final score for Mega Man X2 will be 7.9 out of 10. This probably gets seen as just another Mega Man game, but it could be viewed as more than that. I do agree with that assessment if you're a series outsider, however. It's probably not one I can recommend starting out with, although you'll have an easier time with this than the other Super Nintendo X titles. It can be played as part of the Mega Man X Legacy Collection, and was remade as Mega Man Xtreme 2 on the Game Boy Color. Reviewers at release didn't have much to say, further dragging this into the unfortunate category of just another Mega Man game. Electronic Gaming Monthly relegated X2 to the side of the page with no room for comments from the panel. The description called it the sequel everyone was waiting for, but their average score only reached 7.6 out of 10. This game did make the front cover for Nintendo Power since it was their highest ranked game of the month. It was not a particularly high scoring month, however. Their Power rankings for the highly anticipated sequel totaled 14.6 out of 20. Tell me, did you agree with the points I've made? What rating would you give Mega Man X2 for the SNES, initially released in 1994? Like the video to resist the robot uprising, and subscribe for me to never say "What the Sigma" again. Ew, I feel like I need to wash my mouth out already. As ever, thank you for watching, and please continue to be your own unique self.
Do you remember me? Literally unplayable.